Hello and welcome back to the show. This is week 5 waiver wire show. And I am once again excited to have you guys here. My name is Felix Reyes. We're back at it again. We are going to look at a few options that we have available to us this weekend or week 5. I want to also make known that this is the first week of bye weeks. We have the Green Bay Packers, we have the Chicago Bears, we have the Atlanta Falcons, and we have the Pittsburgh Steelers currently out right now. Let's get into the quarterback conversation. I have a few names for y'all. I have quarterback Jackson Dart. You guys paid attention to what Jackson Dart did this week. It was a bit promising for fantasy purposes, of course. He scored 21 fantasy points, but what was very encouraging to see was the 10 rushing attempts. If you are in a 12-team league, this is not a bad pickup to have in your bench. 12-team leagues and up right now, currently rostered on Yahoo in about 24% of Yahoo leagues. I am telling you, Jackson Dart, if he is going to continue to get a lot of these designed to run, especially with a touchdown score, this is going to make him a very valuable fantasy quarterback. So make sure if you are in need of a quarterback or just a backup quarterback in a one quarterback league on your roster, I think Jackson Dart is a good, solid move. Obviously, if this is a two quarterback leagues, which we've talked about in the past, or super flex leagues where you can start a second quarterback, Jackson Dart should not be on the waiver wire. He is too good of a fantasy asset so far into his debut. I think one more name that I wanted to mention here, there's not going to be a lot of names. It's really hard to find those quarterbacks. Hopefully by then you guys have benched, have some on your bench, or don't have a bye week to worry about. But if so, I think Sam Darnold is another good option. Sam Darnold is going to give you consistent scores here. If you've seen previous shows, I've told you names like Matthew Stafford, names of players that have also been really good streaming quarterbacks for your leagues. Sam Darnold has another opponent coming up here with Tampa Bay. So if you have a bye week this week, meaning Caleb Williams, Jordan Love, maybe you've started some Aaron Rodgers or Michael Penix because you're in those type of leagues, super flex, two quarterback leagues, then I would suggest you to consider a guy like Sam Darnold if you don't have already another good option. So Sam Darnold was the other name I wanted to mention here. We're going to go right into one of the bigger ones, positions. The big one I would say this week is wide receiver. But before we get to that, I just want to mention real quick here, thank you guys so much for the support. I really appreciate it. There's been a lot of subscribers onto the channel, a lot of views that we're getting, especially with these shows. Please share more information. I've gotten personal messages, which I do appreciate y'all, and the support of ideas that you guys may have. Again, this is a community I'm trying to build for everyone, not just for myself, but I'm excited that I get to partake in this journey with you guys. So please make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel. Please share this amongst your fantasy football league mates. Trust me, the information I am giving them isn't anything too hidden away. I will still throw some of those names out there. Most leagues by now are fab leagues, so they're blind bids. You should be able to still snatch some of those guys and have a leg up basically on some of your opponents. All right, let's go into the running back position. Obviously, I am showing you guys player lists from one of the leagues that I am currently in. So guys like Nick Chubb are going to be more rostered in other leagues. This is 77%. I think this is a 10-team league that I'm in currently right now, mostly in 12, 14 team leagues, but I think these are one of the 10-team leagues that I happen to fall into. But I want to mention one name, and it's funny because he's probably not even out there, and that is Woody Marks. guys, Woody Marks is someone you should be now absolutely keeping a close eye on. Actually, let's disregard that. We are no longer keeping a close eye on. We should be picking up. We should be putting in a really solid bid if he is out there already. If you guys were already ahead of the curve and have him already on your roster, maybe that was because you had Nick Chubb and needed his backup. Woody Marks is clearly the guy. I wanted to give some information here on Woody Mark. He had about 119 scrimmage yards. He had that rushing touchdown and that receiving touchdown, 17 attempts, 69 rushing yards, 5 targets, 4 receptions for 50 yards. I know we've mentioned in the past and we talked about as far as the type of player he is coming out of USC and how I felt that when he got drafted on to the Houston Texans, it was basically to replace a guy like Dare Gumbawale, who was basically a passing down back. But it looks like Woody Marks has carved out a much bigger role, which is very interesting to see, especially given the news that we still haven't gotten any updates on Joe Mixon. My guess is that we're not going to get any good news of the Joe Mixon side. He's probably out for the whole season. That has not been confirmed yet. But either way, Woody Marks, if he is out there, you should be putting about 40 to 50% of your fab bids. He's a really good option. All right, let's get to the next guy that I know is still out there. And I believe I did see him here not too long ago. Let's see where he's at. We have other guys here. I want to mention Rachaad White is a name that I want to just throw out there real quick before I get to the next guy who should be a priority guy you should be looking into this week. And Rachaad White, simply because we just got news that Bucky Irving got hurt. We don't have much information yet as far as the severity to that injury. So you're going to want guys like Rachaad White, who is currently rostered in 41% of leagues. If you have him already, keep an eye out for this injury news on Bucky Irving. He may be a guy you would be starting this week. Rachaad White would probably carry on the majority of the role, but the other guy, if you're in a deeper league, maybe a 14, 16 team league, maybe even some guillotine leagues, depending on what are we by week 5. Maybe you don't need to go that deep in, but Sean Tucker is another option. He's going to get a lot of workload. We've seen him in the past and what he's able to do with the roles that he has been given. All right, let's go to the guy that I wanted to talk about. His name is Kendre Miller of the New Orleans Saints. We were not expecting to see this, especially if you're in a half PPR league. This is encouraging. This right here is a PPR league, 6% roster. Was very encouraged to see his 11 attempts, 65 rushing yards, and a touchdown. I think one of the biggest things and one of the reasons why I think he's interesting, I would compare him. I wouldn't put him over Woody Marks, obviously. And we're getting into bye week. We're getting into week 5 where we have a little more bye weeks. And we're currently just looking for stashes and players to put on our bench. So those are kind of guys you want to keep an eye out for. But Kendre Miller was starting to carve a row this week, at least it seemed like. And you saw him get these 11 carries and 65 yards. He's a third-year back. If you saw him in the past with the New Orleans Saints, you knew Dennis Allen, who is now the defensive coordinator for the Chicago Bears, was the head coach for the New Orleans Saints. Seemed to not have a lot of love for this player. In return, we did not get to see Kendre Miller really carve out a decent role. There is talent there. He was a really good player coming out of TCU. I think that eventually we might see a little more of him. We heard a lot of positive news coming out of the offseason about Kendre Miller, and there's not much competition. I know they drafted Devin Neal, who I was very fond of coming out of Kansas, but Devin Neal is not ready to take on any bit of any role. Kendre Miller is going to be the next man up. I expect, especially with the way this team is trending, Alvin Kamara could be a possible NFL trade target to another team. If so, Kendre Miller takes on that role. He also does catch out of the backfield. We didn't see that this week with his lower numbers. One name that I want to throw out there for you guys as well, especially for those who play in deeper leagues. If you saw the news of Braylon Allen, sounds like he's going to be going on the injured reserve. Kenneth Gainwell, for instance, shouldn't be out there, but going right back to Braylon Allen should be on the IR shortly. We should be getting that news. He got ruled out fairly quickly, and I would say that the guy you want to keep an eye out for is Isaiah Davis. If you are in a deeper league, and I want to help out those folks in deeper leagues because it's so hard sometimes to find players in the waiver wire. Isaiah Davis carved out a pretty decent role last year. If you were following along with the New York Jets, I think that he's going to carve out another decent role, even with the small time that he had yesterday, the small sample size. It's encouraging to see him in the receiving side of things and also on the rushing side of things. So this is the now handcuff to Breece Hall. You don't need to roster him in a 12-team league. I am suggesting this for deeper leagues in the case something were to happen or you needed something because out of desperation. Isaiah Davis is a guy you should keep a close eye on. All right, for the biggest position of the week, let's get to it. It is the wide receiver position. Again, let me remind y'all, this is a 10-team league. I need to mention this because there are some names you guys are going to be surprised that are out there, or maybe not. Stephon Diggs had a really good week this week, but we are not going to get into this conversation because in most 12 to 14 leagues, you won't find guys like Stephon Diggs out there or even Jawan Jennings. This is simply a 10-team league. That's also good for those who are in those leagues. Some of these players I'm probably mentioning right now aren't players you're going to probably go after unless you are probably the person who lost Malik Neighbors, Tyreek Hill, CeeDee Lamb. If you're that guy or that gal or that individual who lost some of those players or maybe two of those players on your team, maybe you're going to be in need of grabbing some wide receivers out there. But let's go right to it. Darius Slayton, with the mention of Malik Neighbors, I think Darius Slayton is a guy you're going to want. Darius Slayton, even with Russell Wilson out there, was taking on the majority of the workload. He was basically wide receiver 2 as far as routes ran, snap shares. So Darius Slayton is a guy you should be looking into. With Malik Neighbors now out, I expect him to be the current wide receiver 1. Darius Slayton, if you've seen him in the past with guys such as Daniel Jones, you have seen how awesome he's been able to do, especially as a big play player. Again, I understand Jackson Dart is basically a rookie debuting and doing something new. We don't know just yet where that is coming from, but Darius Slayton is going to be a guy I would be interested if Wan'Dale Robinson happens to be out there. And that's why I'm not posting him up here, because Wan'Dale Robinson is probably rostered in most leagues, especially in PPR leagues, just because of how good of a player he is. But Robinson and Slayton both had 4 targets each from Jackson Dart on his 20 passing attempts against the Chargers. Slayton led the team with a 3-44 line, 4 targets for 7.40 fantasy points. He scores a touchdown, and we are having a whole different conversation. Romeo Doubs is another guy I want to mention. It's just funny because although he's on a bye week this week because of the Green Bay Packers being on a bye week, Romeo Doubs did score 3 touchdowns, y'all. You were watching that game. Unfortunately, it went down to the wire. I mean, going down to the wire was the fun part. Ending on a tie was the unfortunate part if you're a fan of either teams. I'm a Bears fan. I am perfectly fine with either a loss or a tie for a Packers fan, but that's neither here or there. 29 fantasy points, 8 targets, 6 receptions, 58 yards, 3 touchdowns. We still expect Matthew Golden to ascend and have a bigger role now on the Green Bay Packers, but Romeo Doubs obviously has a role carved out for him as basically the number 1 wide receiver. Jordan Love has a rapport with him, and there's a tight connection here. Romeo Dobbs, if he's out there, someone to consider. I understand he's on a bye week. Maybe he's not going to cost you as much as far as fab goes if you have that in your league. But Romeo Dobbs, I think so far right now is a nice stash, especially given the Jaden Reed information we already know of, how he's going to be out for a majority portion of the games. All right, Malik Washington is the next guy that I want to mention here. Malik Washington, y'all. Malik Washington is now a name we're going to be talking a little bit more about because Tyreek Hill, man, so unfortunate. If you guys watched that game last night for Monday Night Football, Malik Washington is going to have a much bigger role. There's guys on that team such as Nick Westbrook-Ikine, and you also have a new player that they just signed off of the Saints practice squad, Cedric Wilson Jr., who was previously under this regime of Mike McDaniels. So keep an eye out for that player. That is another guy you are going to be interested. He just has a lot of big play opportunities, and I think that he's able to cash out big in terms of spike weeks. And maybe you're not starting him on a week-to-week base. So if you have Jalen Waddle, that's already a great thing. And I'm going to mention shortly a guy on this Miami Dolphins team that I think you should be really considering now more than ever because Tyreek Hill is out. But back to wide receiver, we have another player here that I want to talk about. And he's currently on the IR, but he's expected to be back shortly, real soon. And given the current circumstances of the Carolina Panthers, Jalen Coker, 9% roster, is someone you should probably start stashing. And if he continues to have the IR symbol on it, that's going to help you because you can stash him in your IR spot, which is already a solid and great thing because that gives you an opportunity to put more on your bench. But Jalen Coker, talented receiver, yes, was an undrafted player coming out of Holy Cross College, but if you saw him last year, looked really sharp, looked really good under this offense. Yes, this offense that has not looked the best, but build a nice little connection with Bryce Young. I think that he comes in there and helps Tet McMillan and others really look good. So I think Jalen Coker is a guy you should be considering. As we move forward here, I want to talk about the final position. Before actually, the final position would be defense, right? But I'm going to talk about tight end. Again, 10-team league. Do disregard some of the names that are still out there. But Darren Waller, I mentioned Miami, right? Darren Waller just had a 17-point fantasy game. 4 targets, 3 receptions, 27 yards, 2 touchdowns. Clearly, the 2 touchdowns were a big part. I've heard around the league or fantasy circles, I've heard people talk about how tight ends don't really get targeted as much for the Miami Dolphins. But if you watch Jonnu Smith last year under Mike McDaniels, that was a different story. Jonnu Smith had a lot of volume on this team. I'm not saying Darren Waller is going to get the exact volume, right? But it was really good to see him coming out of his debut on the Monday Night Football. Kind of look like his old self. As long as he stays healthy, y'all, I think he's a solid tight end to play on a week-to-week basis. Maybe you're not starting him, but given now that we're heading into bye weeks, so if you have a Packers team, you have Tucker Kraft, you probably don't have Cole Kmet, but if you have, let's say, Kyle Pitts, or maybe even Jonnu Smith from the Steelers, any of those tight ends, you're probably looking for someone out there in the waiver wire, or maybe your tight end hasn't done well. This is someone I want you guys to absolutely consider and put in a claim for. I'm interested in Darren Waller in some of my leagues, and I plan to get some of him. Mason Taylor is the other name I want to talk about. We heard a lot of rave reviews coming out of the offseason. Played at LSU, really solid tight end. He's looking the part. I believe he had about a 26% target share yesterday, but 7 targets is really good to see, especially given that the New York Jets don't have a solidified wide receiver 2. This is the second receiver on this team currently right now, as we saw in the last 2 weeks. Last week we saw Tyrod Taylor out there, but it was very encouraging to see Justin Fields also pepper Mason Taylor. Mason Taylor looked good running those routes and really just being out there. Truly think that he should be a guy you should be considering. I think he's going to help a lot of leagues and a lot of teams that are in current needs of tight ends. Tight ends is usually a very thin position. If you have Brock Bowers or Trey McBride, you usually feel really good right now. There are a few other tight ends. I mean, you have Dallas Goedert this past week, or a Jake Ferguson recently. Those are good, but I just named literally 4 or 5 tight ends. There's not many out there. I'm sure there's a team, especially in a 12, 14, 16 team league, who's in desperate need of a tight end. This is a guy I would highly consider to keep an eye out for. 6% rostered. I'm sure he's going to be a very popular name this week for waiver wire week. Let's go on to defense. I like to do this. This has been something I just started doing. I want to get a few defensive teams out there. Arizona, if they are out there, they have a really fun matchup. They are only rostered in 20% of Yahoo leagues. I'm currently using Yahoo. I'm sure they're also available on ESPN leagues. They are playing the Tennessee Titans. If you have watched the Tennessee Titans recently, there's a lot of hopes that I still have for this team. Maybe it's going to need a change of an offensive playmaker. Offensive coordinator, which is the play caller. They just switched out their play caller, but they might need a change in coaching before this team starts looking a little bit better. Have some talented players. They have some talent on the offensive line. Nothing just seems to be looking good. If you heard Cam Moore speak out, I mean, he kept it real. If you haven't seen it, check out those quotes. He kept it pretty real with the state of how this team looks right now. They got blinked by the Houston Texans. They are playing the Arizona Cardinals this week. I expect the Arizona Cardinals to have a really solid game against them. So this is a really good defense to consider. I think the other defense to consider that should be out there for you guys are the New York Giants. They played really well versus the Los Angeles Chargers, giving up 18 points, 2 sacks, 2 interceptions versus Justin Herbert. This week, they take on the New Orleans Saints. I like to look at matchups that we can attack. Those are the type of matchups you want to attack. I'll give you one more out there. I'm going to say, Miami's playing Carolina. If you want to get there, you can. I think that if I don't see it, I'll just mention it. Yes, they are right here. The Indianapolis Colts playing the Raiders. The Raiders offense has not looked great outside of Ashton Genty. For those who are pretty much panicking about a rookie running back, I'm glad for those who held on. I hope you started him because he should have not been benched. Ashton Genty had a really good game versus the Chicago Bears. I still expect the Colts to have a better outing on defense versus this team. This defense is a little more talented than the Chicago Bears. I think the Colts defense is an interesting one out there as well. This is for those folks who are streaming currently defenses. But again, let me remind y'all, it doesn't really matter who you have. In most cases, yes, the Denver Broncos, where you kind of probably paid a little more of a higher draft capital, or even the Steelers, who had a really good outing. If you have the Minnesota Vikings defense, that's looked the part. But, Green Bay defense looks good for 4 weeks. And then next to the Dallas Cowboys, they get -4, -5 points, depending on your scoring settings. Anything can change. Anything can happen. Just keep these teams in mind. I like to consider their matchups, of course, as I'm sure everyone else does. Again, y'all, thank you so much for watching this. Again, please like and subscribe. I will be on this Sunday once again, 10:35 a.m. Central. That is 11:35 a.m. Eastern Time, answering questions, start-sit questions for Week 5 and DFS talk as we get ready to attack that slate. Once again, thank you guys so much for hopping onto the show. Please make sure to hit the like button, subscribe, and share this with others as we continue to move forward. Thank y'all. Peace.